Good afternoon to the HUGO, good afternoon to Scoring Goals, to the session with star composer Howard Shore. Before we ask Howard Shore to come on stage, I would like to introduce you to Peter Cowie, to the moderator of this session this afternoon. And also he is a film historian and a former international publisher of the Variety magazine. But mainly he is involved here also as program consultant since its beginning of the Talent Campus, now under the name Berlinale Talents. Welcome, Peter. And I also would like... Yeah. And also I would like to thank Dolby Laboratories for this great support that we have all the years here, a sound program, only designed also for sound designers and composers. As maybe you know, under this 300 selected participants of Berlinale Talents, we also select 15 sound designers and composers. And I hope they are all here in the audience. And 3 of them had got the possibility also to do a Dolby Atmos mixing recently on Sunday in Post Republic. And if you would like to see or hear the results of this Atmos mixing, also including other film examples of films recently mixed in Dolby Atmos, please come and join us on Thursday morning at 10 in the Sinister 7. So it's now time to give you the microphone and yeah, okay. Please enjoy the session.
Thank you, Christine. Well, good afternoon. There's no doubt that Howard Shore is one of the most versatile and really imaginative of contemporary film composers. Of course, he's known for those wonderful scores for Lord of the Rings, which won him 3 Oscars, but his range of work is quite extraordinary, starting with films, crime thrillers like Silence of the Lambs and Seven, via period gems like Ed Wood, Martin Scorsese's Hugo, all the way to comedies like Big and Mrs. Doubtfire. And that's not to forget his remarkable collaboration with his fellow Canadian David Cronenberg, 15 films and counting. And we're delighted that Howard has actually come specially from New York for this occasion. So please welcome Howard Shore. There we go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. Thank you, Peter.
Not at all. Howard, the cliche first question, of course, is always, how did you start composing? I mean, you told me once, I think, that there hasn't been a day since you were 10 that you don't compose something.
Right. I pretty much write every day, but I did start, I had a teacher when I was 10, Morris Weinswag, who was the brother of John Weinswag, who was a very famous Canadian composer, and I was studying the clarinet, and I was interested in jazz and in woodwinds, and in my class, and I think it was because Morris's relationship to his brother, who was quite famous, he felt that this young student should learn harmony and counterpoint, as well as the clarinet lesson. So every week I had to do a written lesson of harmony and counterpoint. So he got me writing early on, and really I've never put the pencil down. I mean, it's just been a constant through all these years.
And yet there's a paradox in that you started, in a way, in popular music because you met Lorne Michaels and you were friends when you were very young, and that led to Saturday Night Live, where you became band leader. Saturday Night Live, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary this weekend, and I know you're going back for that. On
Sunday, yes.
On Sunday.
Yes.
And you were there right from the beginning.
Well, I was the original music director. I studied at Berklee School of Music in Boston with John Bavicki, who taught composition and choral music, and I think my love of writing for voices and for the choir, I think was really stimulated in those years that I was in Boston. But I always had a desire to write, and but I had no real opportunity to do it. So the years of, I was on the road for years.
With Lighthouse?
Lighthouse, and I did 1,000 one-nighters in 4 years with the band. We were constantly on the road, and we traveled in England and through Canada, United States. We did concerts in the Far East, and I did 8 albums with Lighthouse. And so by the time I was 22, I had already come off the road, and we opened for acts like the Grateful Dead at Fillmore and in New York and in Los Angeles. We toured with Jefferson Airplane, Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company. So I actually had a whole career by the time I was 22, and then I started going into singer-songwriter world, and I was writing songs and performing them with a small group.
Okay.
And also started writing for CBC radio in Canada. And around this time I met Lorne Michaels, and we did summer camp shows in Northern Ontario, and which actually were similar productions to Saturday Night Live. So my friends were always writers, directors, actors, and I did a lot of repertory theater at a time. I did some direction, I did some writing, and I eventually, followed my interest in music to Berklee, and then from Berklee to the road with Lighthouse, and that led on to more television, Saturday Night Live, and then films in the late 70s with Cronenberg.
Yeah. Now, David Cronenberg, I think you discovered his films, his first experimental films at the Film Society, and was that in Toronto?
Well, when I was 14 and 15, David's, I think, at least 2 or 3 years older than I am.
Yes, yes.
So that age difference, when I was 14, he was 17. And 17 is a big difference. It means you can drive. And David had a beautiful Italian motorcycle. He had beautiful leather outfit that he wore, and he was in our neighborhood, and I would see him riding around the streets in Toronto, and I go, "Who's that? I mean, who's that guy?" You know? And it turned out that I found out that he made films, and it was popular in that period. This is the '60s, to go to underground film festivals, and it was Kenneth Anger films and all these experimental films, and we'd see them on the weekends at midnight, kind of thing, or not, into the evening, and that was kind of popular thing. And when I was 16, I would go to these midnight kind of screenings, 17, and so I knew about David Cronenberg, but it wasn't till maybe I was in my late 20s that I approached him. So after maybe 10 or 12 years, and I've been writing music all during this period, I sort of got up the courage, to ask him. I did one film before. The first film I did with David was The Brood, and I did one film before, which was called I Miss You, Hugs and Kisses. It was directed by Murray Markowitz. It was the Demeter murder trial. It starred Elka Summer. And so I had a little experience. I kind of was very self-taught in terms of film. I just bought a lot of books. I spent a lot of time in the library listening to a lot of music and studying a lot of books. And I kind of developed a lot of my own techniques about how to use music in film. And I was, I kind of just tried to figure things out myself. I built my own structure, really, for how to create music for films in the early days, because I had no mentor.
And did you get into the synthesizer early?
No, well, The Brood, which was one of the first scores I wrote for Cronenberg, is completely acoustic score. I think there's maybe one electronic piece in it. And I was really interested in electronics at an early age because I had tape recorders. Now, in the 50s, I came of age in the 50s. I was born in 46, so by the time I was, 10, which is 56, 57, 58, you started to see the advent of home recorders. And we were a nice middle-class family in Toronto. My dad got one of these for me, and I just spent hours and hours with the tape recorder doing my own recordings, making my own field recordings, recording pieces and editing them. I had a little editing block. So then I had a sound-on-sound recorder where you could do bouncing from one track to the other. And I was interested in electronics early on from discovering Takemitsu's music in a library in Toronto in St. Clair and Avenue Road. And I heard pieces like Green, and I mean, it just so sparked my imagination of what was possible with electronics. But my interest in electronics was pre-computer. It was Bell Labs, music concrete. It was the early stages of electronic music, Morton Subotnick, that kind of thing. And then once computers started to be added to it, I just kept following that. So I followed the progression of it through the 70s, right up to now. I mean, I used electronics and, Maps to the Stars, which was the last score I did for David Cronenberg. 35 years later, still using, electronics. And my library's unique, things that I've developed over the years and certain sounds that I've collected.
Well, now that you can pretty much choose the subjects you like, how do you select a project? Do you do it on the basis of a script that might be sent to you by an agent or by a director friend? Do you do it, obviously in the case of Cronenberg or Scorsese, it's out of friendship, but what are the criteria you apply to whether you accept a commission or not?
Well, I think it changes over the years. Sometimes I would accept things. I mean, during the 90s, I was doing so many films, and I was doing everything. I mean, in 1986, I did After Hours, The Fly, and Big. They all came out the same year. And so after that period, that 1 year, I was offered a lot of different films. And so I tried a lot of different things just for the fun of trying it. It's like Mrs. Doubtfire wasn't a film that I had a real connection to, but I thought, oh, this is
it's a fun
terrific
score.
comedy.
Yeah, it's a fun score.
And it's Robin Williams. So I thought I would try that. I recorded it in Hollywood. I recorded Big in Hollywood at Fox Studios. So I was interested in the recording studio, and I was interested in working in different locations. Like sometimes I would record in Los Angeles really to match the sound of the film. In the same way I would record Aviator was recorded in Leuven in Belgium to capture an older sound of Hollywood. So I was interested in the location and the orchestra to create the sound. So the score is like Mrs. Doubtfire and Big, all done in Hollywood to capture that sound. So I would choose things sometimes just for the challenge. What would that be like to write that? And that sort of took me through the 90s. And then once I got to, around the turn of the century and Lord of the Rings, I started to become more selective with my time and the energy I had. I was writing more concert music. I became interested in different things. I wrote an opera. I've written, piano, cello concerto. So I became interested in other forms of music as well as film music. So it became more selective, I think.
And how do you first go about, do you create a number of cues off the bat on the piano and then send them away to be orchestrated? How is the process?
Well, I like to read a lot, so I do a lot of research on the projects that I work on, and I've done a lot of literary adaptations like Crash and Naked Lunch, Looking for Richard, all the Tolkien, all of those scores are all literary adaptations from a classic book. So I do a lot of research. I write a lot based on the story, the ideas inherent in the script or the book. And I've worked that way, maybe the last 15 years or 20 years, where I'll write a body of music just based on the story. It doesn't have to do with the film specifically or the scenes in the film, but I collect a body of work. I did that on Naked Lunch. Dead Ringers was done that way as well. I would watch the film once and then write this piece, a suite, if you will, sometimes 40, 50 minutes of music for the film. And I would try to capture all the themes and the motifs that I would use in the score. Then I would sit with the director, figure out where those pieces of music, or I would spot the film with the director, and we'd just talk about the themes and where the music would be used in the film. And then I would take what I had composed, I write in pencil, so they were all pencil sketches, and then I would place them into the film specifically, and I would orchestrate them. I've done a lot of my own orchestration over the years, but I would orchestrate them specifically for the scenes in the film, and then I would take that to the podium or the recording studio and produce the recordings.
Of course, you have a cameo at the end of King Kong, don't you, when you're conducting the Max Steiner?
Yeah, I've heard about that.
We have, thanks to you, we have 7 clips from your work. We're going to show them in chronological order. And the first one is from The Silence of the Lambs. Now, that was a film that came out in, as I recall, end of January, February, and just took everybody by storm and retained its impetus through the year to clean up.
It came out on Valentine's Day.
Came out on Valentine's Day, okay.
1990,
okay.
I believe.
2 weeks after.
Or 91, yeah.
And the clip we have, it, to me, expresses some of your greatest talents, which is not only to communicate this sense of foreboding and dread, but also in the scene, which only part, unfortunately, we can only see part of it, but it's where Jodie Foster is trapped by the serial killer, Buffalo Bill, at the very end of the film, and she's in the darkness. And because the imagery is so electrifying, the music becomes subliminal. But the music, if you listen for it, is actually driving the suspense forward all the time. Could we see the first clip, please? How did Jonathan Demme contact you about that? Was that because of your work with Cronenberg?
Yes, probably. You know, in talking to Jonathan about this film and about the spotting of it, he kept directing. You know, film music is so much point of view, and in a scene like this, you could have taken the Lecter, point of view, or Gum's point of view, which would have been a much more horrific type of scene. And you can hear the music is very passionate, it's very opera-like. And so Jonathan's idea was to use Clarice, Jodie Foster character, Clarice Starling, as the point of view of the music. So it always has this emotional underpinning to it. And it was something that hadn't really been done a lot, I think, in what could have been a genre film. And I experimented with it, particularly in The Fly, which was maybe, I think, 86, so it was maybe 4 or 5 years before this. And I remember the difficulty I had with writing this type of opera-based score for The Fly, because people didn't understand it. They didn't know why you would write music for what they thought of was a B type of horror movie. And it wasn't until, and I had a lot of struggle getting it mixed correctly in the film. And when the picture came out and it was successful, everybody took credit for this marvelous idea, you know. So I kept developing the idea, and Silence was a development of that idea. And so you have this kind of orchestral piece. I mean, the Fly was really the first, you know, very symphonic score that I wrote, that I actually had the budget able to, you know, do a score with the London Phil.
And of course, you went on to convert it into an opera, which has been staged around the world.
I did create, well, in Trier. It was done in Paris and Los Angeles and in Trier in Germany, actually. So I guess I always had that way of looking at those stories a little bit beyond the genre and about what could be possible. And so I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about writing to the story and then applying the storytelling idea to the film, sometimes in different types of ways. Interestingly, this feels rather conventional now, and you see a lot of movies being made with this type of sound, or this orchestral sound. But at the time, people weren't really trying to do that.
That's right,
1990, so it's like
91, yeah, or 91.
91, so it's almost 25 years ago.
Well, the next clip will be from, in the same kind of genre, which is David Fincher's Seven. And perhaps before we show the clip, you could talk a little about the way that you have collaborated with certain great sound designers, like Eugene Garrity on Hugo, but particularly Ren Kleiss on Seven. I think you told me that there's a scene in the car when Brad Pitt gets in and the rain's hurtling down, and you get together with the sound designers to see how you can meld the music. And
yes. Well, I actually started that with Skip Livesey, who was a great sound designer. Now he's gone into mixing.
On Silence.
I did that with Silence of the Lamb. Skip won the Oscar last year for Gravity, but I had worked with him 25 years. We're pretty good friends. And, but on Silence of the Lambs, back then, we collaborated with our two studios. I was working with I worked actually with quite a bit of electronics in Silence of the Lambs with the London, actually, no, I'm sorry, it was recorded in Munich, the score. I didn't do many, I think it was maybe, yeah, it was done in Munich in 90. And, but I also had created, I started creating these electronic pieces that were based on the score. I actually did that going back to, excuse me, to Videodrome. Videodrome was a score that was completely notated. And then each note was entered into the computer. It wasn't played in, it was just entered in. What was the note, what was the dynamic, what was the articulation, each note, and then I assigned certain voices to it. So this was 1979. It was a pretty early 1980, around that period, where computers and music were starting to come together. We had instruments like the synclavier that were starting to blend these two ideas together. And so from that idea, I took scores like Silence of the Lambs, where the score was entered into the computer, same way, same technique, not played in, but entered in. And then I would use very abstract sounds that I had collected from various recordings, really sometimes industrial sounds, ambient sounds, and I would have the computer play that. I would assign that to the parts of the orchestration. So the sound, if the orchestration built to a certain part, like in this scene, the industrial sounds, the ambience would also build, sometimes at different times than the crescendo of the orchestra. So it created these really unstable type of effect where you thought you were listening to an orchestra, but behind it and underneath it, there was something always disrupting it. And I felt it created a kind of instability.
Which is the theme of the film, in a way, the instability of the characters.
Yeah, it created that sense. And I was very interested from Cronenberg in the subliminal nature of music in film. Because in a way, with music, you can talk to the audience in a language that's very different than the visual language. You're saying something to the audience in a way that they can listen very carefully to what you're doing. So I became interested in that subliminal message and the subtext. And so techniques like that were used in Silence of the Lamb to create that, and then they went on to Seven, and where I even developed it even a little further and became a little more bold with the technique because I was kind of experimenting with it at the time.
Well, can we have the second clip, please? Oh, no, it's... Some overwhelming dread.
We're showing some dark things, aren't we?
Yeah,
I think they get brighter, though.
Yeah,
right?
well, hold your... Hold on to your horse, because the next one will be Ed Wood.
Okay.
But I was going on to say that in the great days of the Hollywood epic, you would have this kind of overture which we played as people were coming into their seats and settling down, you know, Lawrence of Arabia and all those epics of the 50s and 60s. And that's been replaced to some extent by the music over the credits, which grabs you. And I think you're particularly good at that. A single white female, you immediately communicate the sense of the film. Silence of the Lambs as she's running through the forest. And Ed Wood has a wonderful credit sequence, which is why we've actually taken that as a clip, because it's a sort of throwback to all those old dark house movies of the 30s with Dracula and Frankenstein, and you do it, you make a new riff on that. You know, it's not a pastiche. You're actually developing it. And,
yes.
And I think that's such fun. Was it fun working with Tim Burton?
Well, I love that period of the late 50s. Yeah. It's also the period of Naked Lunch. I think we're going to show a little bit from that as well. It's a great, vibrant period in films and science fiction, horror.
Maybe we should say who Ed Wood was. I mean, Ed Wood was reputedly the worst ever director in Hollywood, and yet he had a sort of engaging charm as he went from Z studio to Z studio, trying to persuade producers to give him a few dollars to make a film. And Tim Burton's very affectionate tribute to him is the subject of the film. And I'm not sure if we have that ready, but if we have that ready, could we see that sequence, please? Oh, this should be it.
That featured the great Russian thereminist Lydia Kavina, who is theremin who invented the instrument in Russia in the 20s in Moscow. She's theremin's great niece, and he had taught her to play the instrument. So she does all the theremin solos on that score, recorded in London with the London Phil.
Do you insist on conducting your scores?
I did conduct all these scores, yes. I think I conducted Silence. I didn't conduct Seven, but I did Ed Wood. I mix it up a bit. Sometimes I orchestrated Ed Wood, and it depends on the project, whether I conduct or not.
Now, we're going to jump from Tim Burton in a minute to David Cronenberg, but what was it like working with Tim Burton, who is well known for his demand? I mean, he's very demanding on his actors, very demanding on his technicians. He has high standards, with also very idiosyncratic.
Yes, well, he'd done such great work with Danny Elfman, and I loved all those films and knew them all. So he on this film, he actually had asked Henry Mancini to work on it, who was a master of this period. A lot of people didn't realize that Henry Mancini did a lot. He worked for Universal in the 50s and actually had done a lot of horror, a lot of genre films, monster movies and things like that. And so he would have been perfect, but he became ill. And he died actually not long after, and I kind of took over and I dedicated the score to Henry Mancini.
He had bad luck because on The Godfather, he was commissioned by Robert Evans to write the score, and then Coppola found Rota in Rome, and so Mancini's score was never used.
Yeah.
He did do Moon River, so he was happy.
He did many fabulous, amazing work. So, but I felt fortunate to be able to work on it. It's a period I love, and in Ed Wood's world, you could do no wrong, really. And working with Tim was very much like a very fun playground kind of experience.
We talked about David Cronenberg and he being 17, you 14, and almost growing up together. He said in an interview that when he works with you, you will tie the music to the very frame. You know, it'll be very precise, the way that the music is laid onto the film. What's the first step you get a call from David and says, I'm doing a new film? Does he tell you the outline? How does it
Right.
develop?
He usually calls with the idea that he's going to do this new script. He'll send me the script if it's based on a book or a novel, which quite a few of the movies have been. Then I'll start the research. I'll start to go back and read everything I can relate to it, and then he. We might have a few conversations about casting and about location, where he's going to shoot. We don't really talk about music. I usually go to the set once to, just kind of pick up the vibe a bit of what he's doing. And I like to see him on set, at work. And Peter Szyszewski, the great cinematographer who's there, and I get to meet a lot of my friends. So I'll go to the set one day and have lunch with David, and then I'll wait till he has a rough cut, and during that period, I'll be composing just based on the story. As I was mentioning earlier, I'll do my suite, really, music for the film, and then once he has a cut, we'll spot it together, and we've become very intuitive doing that and how to use music. Lately, even, I think the last film, I spotted it, and I sent David all the notes, and he said, great, yeah, so we have a good connection about how to use music in the film. We don't have a lot of disagreements. He really gives me a lot of freedom to create, and I think it's part of our upbringing from the 60s, where people on the production were very equal, and you were able to create as much as you could based on the story and the themes of the film. And then David would do just maybe a little bit of editing, not very much, and he does that with all his collaborators. He treated me the way he would treat Jeremy Irons or any the actors that he would work with, where he would let you develop everything you needed for the film, and then he might just edit it a little bit or tweak it a little bit or guide you this way or that way, and that's the way we've always worked. It's always been that very free process.
But I imagine that not all directors are as generous, and I think even on Seven, you told me you would receive individual scenes that were very murky. You had to look at the monitor and work out what they were in, and yet try to do some music as you went along.
Well, Seven, all the films I did with David Fincher, I did 3 films with him: Seven, Panic Room, and The Game. Yeah. But he was very generous. I mean, I think he was very respectful of the process, and he watched carefully everything that was going on in the studio. And he could tell how, once I sink into a film, I think in some ways it might be better just to leave him alone, because he's going to do his best work without a lot of obstruction. And they can always do the editing they want to do, or touch up in the dub. But if you have the composer who's deeply involved in the work and in the story, my advice is just to let him go and do it, because things will develop and come up unrestricted that you might never have been able to achieve, if you let the process develop.
I think with very big Hollywood productions, often the composer is really squeezed to produce a score very swiftly after the film is finished.
Sometimes, yes. Yeah. There is that. I mean, you have to have a good craft, That's why early on I learned to write music, and I still believe in that technique of the pencil, because it's very precise. I don't need to work with a computer. I can create everything I need with those 5 parallel lines in a pencil, the same way music has been written for hundreds of years. So there must be a reason why it's still a good method.
On a personal note, do you have a set routine? How do you write in the morning? Do you write at night? Do you have, when's your best inspiration?
Well, I like to write in the morning, and I basically write every morning, and I divide my day up into sessions. Musicians have sessions. There's 3 hours, and that when you book an orchestra, everything is in these 3-hour kind of increments. So I kind of run my musical life in sessions, like a 1-session day. It's a pretty easy day. Double session, pretty full day, and a triple session is like the deadline is next week, you know. So that's how I kind of work it. But almost every day is a single session.
And you write, I would think, you're happiest writing in the country, away from New York, not in the hurly-burly of the big city.
No, I lived in New York for years, and I wrote in the Brill Building for over 10 years. And I would go into, I had a room that was completely soundproof, padded, if you will, without windows. And I would go in there from early in the morning to late at night. And that was the entire day I would spend in this room. And I did that for so many years, and I thought there must be another life to this. And so I discovered nature. And I now live in a forest that's really beautiful outside of New York, and it has lakes and mountains and trees. It's very much, I grew up in Canada, northern Ontario. Every summer it was Muskoka and Algonquin Park. And so I found a place like my Canadian home that's very green. And I thought actually, and I made a really strong connection to nature. In this forest that I lived in, I discovered things that the bird that you see in the spring is the same bird you see every spring. And I didn't realize that. I thought they went somewhere and other birds came back, but no, it's the same animals, it's the same squirrel you see year after year, you know. So I've made this connection to the trees that I love and to the lakes. And I thought that nature connection was a strong one with Tolkien. I know we'll get into that, but
that's right,
because he had this great love of nature.
Right.
And I thought that was really, I thought, maybe part of how I could express his ideas well, because I had this similar love of everything green and good.
All right, in order to get to Tolkien, we must press on. Can we have the next clip, which is from Crash, a film by David Cronenberg, which I remember seeing that in Cannes, and it set everybody talking, everybody on edge, because it was quite bold for its time in various ways, not least erotic ways.
Well, it won an award at Cannes, you know that, right? For audacious original filmmaking.
That's right.
Yeah,
it was audacious.
I think it's the only time it's ever been awarded, I think. Audacious filmmaking.
Yeah. Well, I think it was everybody's guilty pleasure. Okay, can we have the clip, please?
This score was, David suggested it was a return to guerrilla filmmaking. So we went back to a very smaller sound. And after, this film came after the film M. Butterfly. That was very symphonic. It was a very lush score, again recorded with the London Phil. And the idea for this was to try a different approach. Okay. And this score with M. Butterfly, I used 2 harps in the orchestra, and they were placed left and right. And after that, I wrote a piece for 3 harps, and I thought, okay, I can place the 3 harps left, center, right. Mm-hmm. And I was very interested in the art of physics of recording and about surround sound. So this was an experiment in surround sound. Mm-hmm. And I took the harp parts and I scored them for 2 electric guitars playing each harp part, left, center, right, and then added percussion and some woodwinds. But essentially, and the 3 harps were recorded as well, the 3 acoustic symphonic harps. But the 6 electric guitars play this 3-part counterpoint, essentially. It's really a little chamber piece, and that's really the result of it.
Well, we get to Lord of the Rings because I think there's a link in a way between what you've just been saying, the way you use the orchestra, and it's just a jump up. I mean, up to a 95-piece orchestra or whatever. Everything is on a greater scale.
96,
it's on an operatic scale, isn't it, the music? And I think including The Hobbit, you've written something like 21 hours of music for those 6 films. Now, opera is obviously very important to you. Not only have you written opera, but I have a feeling that you really love the great operatic composers of the past, particularly Wagner. There's this lovely little riff on the Siegfried Idyll in A Most Dangerous Method.
Dangerous Method.
You know, and Do you think those great 19th century composers would be working in Hollywood if they were alive today?
Quite possibly. I mean, my interest was really in Italian opera before I got into Lord of the Rings. But once I got into the idea of themes and motifs, then I looked to Wagner for that. But I've been an admirer of the opera for years, and I go regularly. And I actually based all of my recording on the opera at the Met in New York of the Pit. So I set up all my orchestral recordings exactly the way the Pit was set up for surround sound, if you will, left, center, right. And so I imagined the scores to be the opera pit, and that the stage, you know, the proscenium and the stage would be the screen. So I started writing in that formation to capture the sound of the pit to the screen. And actually, the London Phil was such a great collaborator for it, because they do an opera festival in England every year called the Glyndebourne Festival. So they're an orchestra that is well versed in accompaniment, which is really what film music, the basis of film music is.
And I think although you had a great relationship with Peter Jackson, there's no doubt that you are drawn to Tolkien and the whole world of Tolkien, and therefrom came your inspiration.
Right. Well, I had read the books in the 60s, and I was a fan. I didn't know the film was being made or anything had been done with it. I just received a phone call one day. I picked up the phone, and it was Peter, and we started a conversation. I met Fran Walsh and Philip Aboyans, went to New Zealand, saw the filmmaking, which was extraordinary, met Alan Lee and John Howe, the great Tolkien illustrators, Richard Taylor, and it was something you absolutely could not say no to, but in saying yes, it set you on a course of adventure that it took through 4 years, almost 4 years of work to create Lord of the Rings.
Did you write any music out in New Zealand, or did you come home and write it all in the piece?
Oh, I wrote everywhere. I wrote in the North Island, the South Island. I wrote in hotels. I wrote in the Dorchester Hotel. For so long, they gave me my own robe with my name on it. You know? I mean, I was a resident. I wrote in New York. I wrote in Los Angeles. I wrote everywhere. Everywhere. I mean, I'm very efficient in a way. And really, if you think of the technique that I use, I write my sketches in pencil in 6-line scores. So I'm writing on paper that's no larger than this for the sketch, which you could do anywhere. And then that becomes A3, you know, a larger score for the 30 stave for the orchestration. But the scores are done that way. I mean, the entire Ed Wood score is written on that, you know. So it was a way to move the data easily. I could fax it, I could scan it. So I was very self-contained. And I just watched the picture on, you know, small screens. That was one of the problems with 7, because I was looking at it on such a small screen. It was so dark, the movie. It was hard to see, but you know, I could figure out enough of what was going on.
Well, we have a clip from The Two Towers, the second film in the trilogy.
Do you want me to set it up a little bit? Maybe it's good to talk.
Yeah, I was just going to say that...
Talk a little bit before it.
Yeah, please, but just before, I just want to say that the quiet themes have really captured the imagination of people. The Shire theme, for example, is played on classic FM over and over again. And but we forget that actually a large part of the music in The Lord of the Rings is very powerful, you know, strong, full orchestral music, and this extract will show that. So please say something.
Is this...
This is where Gandalf appears on the slope, I think, and comes down.
Well, this is pretty self-explanatory, I think.
Yeah. Okay, let's go.
Okay.
Press them.
Thank you. It's the great Ian McKellen, who I just saw in Bill Condon's movie, Mr. Holmes, yesterday.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. He's... and also Christopher Lee, who I met in Berlin 2 years ago,
Yes.
and he was at a table. He couldn't get up. He said, "You know, I can't stand anymore." I said, "But I saw you in Hugo," and he said, "No, they filmed me from the back. I was actually, yes, I was helped to stand up." And but both of them really have been remarkable. One more thing on Lord of the Rings. You use a lot of choral work in there. You can hear the choral work. Do you?
Yes.
And was that the London Philharmonic Choir, or was there another choir?
The London Voices, Terry Edwards group, the London Voices. It was an idea I had actually early on about the voices, because there's so many poems and songs in the work, in the book.
Yes.
And I thought of a way, I was trying to think of a way to put that back into the film. So by using the choir and the singing, and singing in 6 different Tolkien languages, it was a way to subtly, or sometimes not in the case of this, using the choir, to all singing in Tolkien's languages back into the story. So it added depth to the story, I felt. Yeah.
Well, now we come to Martin Scorsese, for whom you've not only done many recent films, but you actually did one of his very early films, one of his underrated films, After Hours, in 1985. And the clip we have is from the first clip. We have 2 actually, one from The Aviator and one from Hugo. But how does Scorsese work compared with these other greats that you have worked with? Does he have a distinctive method of, does he commission the music right from the start? Does he phone you at a very early stage?
I met Martin Scorsese in the Brill Building in New York in that period, and he collects music. He's an avid archivist and has a huge collection of recorded music. And if he wants to use a piece in the film, he might have a piece. If it was a piece of classical music, he might have 30 recordings of it that he might try different artists playing that piece. So he's an avid collector, and what he does with the making of his films is that he'll never screen. He likes to screen the film a lot when he's editing it, and so every 2 weeks there's a new cut of the film, a new rough mix, and then a screening of the film, and that could go on for 6 or 8 months in films like Hugo. So every few weeks you're redoing, and then you keep adding to it. But he never uses anything in the film, in the making of the film, that doesn't belong in the film. If he tries something and he doesn't want to use it, he discards it. So it's a constant adding to the story of the film, and so we're constantly looking for ways to tell that story better and to add pieces. So we kind of collect music as we go, and I'll be writing and doing. They're not really demos. I'll do small recordings of the score. In the case of Hugo, I wrote a lot for a very small group, and then we would put those pieces into the film. He would never use anything that didn't belong in the film, so he would never use anything like temp music or anything like that.
And isn't he into the Wolf of Wall Street was entirely source music, wasn't it? There was no score. It was all
sometimes there is no score, yes.
And he seems a great fan of using source music.
Well, he'll always start out that way. And it was even, I mean, most of the times I've done, I think, 5 or 6 films with Marty. Hugo is different because it started out as a score, but he will, like movies like The Departed will have source music in it, and sometimes it's just pieces that he uses, not really as traditionally as source music, but just music that he wants in that scene. That could be score, really. And then we usually work on things where he can't discover it. He hasn't figured out a way to achieve it. So I usually come in a little later and try to put the pieces together and make a complete work, of the film musically. So it depends. A score like Hugo didn't have that approach, but other scores have, like The Departed Gangs in New York.
We have a great clip from the beginning of Hugo, but in order to get to it, we have to see a great clip also from The Aviator, which shows the aircraft taking off.
Yes.
And it's very rousing music.
VH1.
Yeah.
This is an experimental flight.
Yeah.
It's the first flight of this new aircraft.
Okay, can we have the next clip, please?
Thank you. Thank you.
Hugo won you yet another Oscar nomination and a lot of other awards, and I think you obviously enjoyed doing the score for Hugo because it meant a lot of research into Belle Epoque music of the time and Paris of that period.
Yes.
It's about Georges Méliès, the great
Yes.
early cinema pioneer. But the way you capture the mood of that period is remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. The Aviator is close to the same period. Yes. This score Aviator was recorded in Leuven, in Belgium, particularly for that 30s sound. I felt this studio that I rehearsed in for a concert really had, and the orchestra really had the right sound for that film.
And who mixes? Are you able to go to the mixing room and ensure that the music is not, say, swamped by the noise of the aircraft or vice versa?
No, not really. I mean, I do occasionally, but generally I would say no. The composer is not really too involved in I mean, I was in some films with Cronenberg, but Marty will do his own mixes.
Have you ever been to a premiere of a film and say, "What? They've ruined my music"?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know,
No names.
A lot of things are possible. Yeah, you have to roll with that a little bit. Yeah, you don't always have a lot of. I mean, you're adding one element to a film, so you know things can be not mixed well. Sometimes there can be. I've had occasions where I've asked them to turn things down because I thought they mixed things too loud. And, you know, it's a bit of give and take, really.
But Hugo is such a joyous score. It's full of fun and full of joy, and it's very unusual, this film, in Scorsese's career, I think. It's almost, it's completely unlike anything he's ever done. And I think obviously everybody had a lot of fun in making the picture.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a love letter to filmmaking.
Yeah.
And the period's very rich. I love that period. And there's been, we think of the silent film era. The word silent is interesting because almost all those scores had live accompaniment. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it was interesting to research that period of the late 19th century into the 20th century, and how you know, film was being screened with live accompaniment. Doug Adams, I don't know if you know Doug.
Of course.
He's excuse me, finishing a book on silent film scores, and he's done amazing research on it. He's been working on it for a few years. I don't think anybody's really made a comprehensive study of the music that was played.
Well, many of the scores were lost, weren't they?
Yes, quite a bit. But he's done amazing research on it. He's got a 650-page book about the history of silent.
It's wonderful.
You know, of music in silent cinema.
Maybe it will encourage revivals of silent films with those scores that he's discovered. Maybe. So the last clip, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. I know you're eager to ask Howard something. Can we have the final clip, which is the opening, this unbelievable opening shot of Hugo?
Thank you.
So, questions. We have about 15 minutes worth of questions, and if you can wait, signal to me, and then wait for the mic to reach you, please. I have a question over there, right here.
Hi, it's an honor to have the first question. Indulge you, Mr. Short. I'm a huge fan of the early Cronenberg films, and especially The Brood, the score as well. I wanted to ask you, it feels a little bit inspired by 20th century chamber music, such as Bartok, and maybe other things, such as 12 tone, and I wanted to ask you if you were inspired by any specific 20th century composers or techniques, such as serialism or 12 tone music for that.
Were you asking about influences?
Yeah,
20th
influences
century
and
composers.
technique of maybe things like 12 tone or Bartok.
Yes, I used a 12-tone technique. It's written for 21 strings, and it's really a chamber piece.
Okay, next question. That was right. Okay, I heard the clicking thumb.
A 1.5 question. Half question is composing for Hollywood is a good business? And the big question is, are you supervise the music from the start with the orchestration, with conducting, with recording, and with placing it on exact place on the movie?
You get that? First thing is, do you make a lot of money out of making the films, of scoring films for Hollywood as opposed to Guess Independent? And that was a small question. The big question was, do you really control all of the various stages, right? All the various stages of...
Yes. Well, I mean, it's very linear. I do the sketches first based on the ideas in the film, the themes and motifs. And that's a work in itself. And then once I have that work, it could be 20 minutes or 40 or 50 minutes, then I apply those pieces to the film. In some scores, like Naked Lunch, and I think Crash as well. I mean, some of the scores have been done where I've literally taken the compositional elements and figured out ways to place them in the film completely. So I didn't score the scene so much as I placed the music in the film. And I do the writing for the composition away from the film. I might only look at the movie once and then write a piece based on it. I work a lot from the script. And if it's the case of, if it's developed from a novel like Naked Lunch, then I study the book, the original book, and other influences that might relate to the original writing of it. So that's really the heart of the composition. And then I go to the film and I start scoring the film based on the spotting with the director about where the music's used. They're all very linear processes. And then I'll write those compositions in pencil. And then once I'm happy with them, I'll orchestrate them in ink, and then I take them to the recording studio, and I conduct them and produce the recordings. Was it earlier?
Yeah, that's a full
about
answer.
The fees?
No, but just whether it's a good business. Is it a good business?
Well, it depends. I mean, I didn't. I did television for years. 75 to 80, and created a show called Saturday Night Live in New York. That was a popular show on NBC, on American network. And that kind of allowed me to do films. I started doing scores in 78, so I don't think I couldn't have really supported myself for maybe 10 years doing films. But the television did, from the residuals, the royalties from the television. And then, so it was probably about 10 years of writing, which took me into the late 80s. And even then, I don't think I was really supporting myself until it took maybe about 10 or 12 years. And then you could kind of start to support yourself as a composer, writing films in Hollywood and recording them in England or doing films in New York. It took a little while to be able to do that.
Is it true, as an aside, is it true that you suggested the name the Blues Brothers to
Yes.
Belushi and so on?
Yes, I did. Well, I did a television show in New York called Saturday Night Live, which was a late night television show. I was one of the original creators of the show, and I had created shows with Lorne Michaels in Canada. We worked for CBC. We grew up in Toronto, in Canada, and we did television. We did radio together, and then we did television together, mostly variety shows. And so that was part of my, growing up process in music. And in that show, we would do a warm-up. Saturday Night Live would do a warm-up to the audience, and I would play pieces with this little band that I had. And the Blues Brothers was something that I did in the early, the warm-up to the show. Okay. I invited Danny Aykroyd up to sing with the band, and then John Belushi wanted to sing with the band, and so a little kind of musical thing started to happen.
Okay. Another question? Upstairs, anybody upstairs? Okay.
Ich habe hier gerade das Mikro. Mein Problem ist, mein Englisch, also it's not very good, aber ich habe einen Bezug, was Filmmusik angeht, und ich habe auch im Hollywood Report ich habe auch mitbekommen, wie soll ich sagen, dass es heute sehr schwierig wird, immer mehr.
Hold on, maybe there's someone next to you who
Bitte?
could try. Maybe da ist vielleicht etwas. Jemand kann übersetzen.
Also, dass man das irgendwie, ich habe jetzt gar nicht so viel, ich habe zwar die Karte gezahlt und ich bin einer von den bescheidenen Musikern, wo es nicht um...
I'm sorry, we can't understand, we should, but we can't. So if you have a neighbor, why don't you let someone else ask a question, but in the meantime, ask someone who's sitting on either side of you to translate for you.
Ich habe jetzt gar nichts verstanden, das Problem...
No. Okay. Well, let's have another question, but we'll get to you later. Okay.
So, can I...
Yeah. Oh. Someone here in the middle? No? Yeah. You got the mic? Do you have the mic in the middle?
I'm not going to get to ask them.
Microphone?
I've got a question from up here. Sorry,
Okay.
way up high. Hi. What do you do when you get writer's block, when something isn't working?
Right. Well, I mentioned earlier on that I've been writing music since I was a child, really, since I was 10. And so it's a very linear process to me, writing music. It's something I developed at a really early age. And I basically write every day. So there isn't a sense of block. It's my feeling is, how will I do everything that I'd like to do with music in my lifetime? I mean, I'm still trying to, there's many things I want to do with film and for the concert hall as well. So it's, I don't have that situation with music. You have to have a really close kind of understanding of music and a love for it and what's possible, and just keep dreaming about it.
Hello, sorry, I'm just here in the balcony. Sorry, I'll just go first, and maybe this gentleman could do the translation for the minute.
So he asked, that's very hard for German composers to get attention in Hollywood, and he asked he as an individual composer, like Hans Zimmer said, what does the individual get in Hollywood?
It's very hard for German composers to get into Hollywood. And
well, why do you want to?
Yeah, right.
I mean, why not write films in Europe or write German language films?
That's
I mean,
right.
they make films all over the world.
Well, this is because Hans Zimmer, has been coming to Europe and spreading the gospel and saying this.
Right. But they make films, great films are made all over the world, as you can see right at the festival right here in Berlin. And there's great filmmakers everywhere, all over the world. Hollywood doesn't have to be your goal. I mean, it's a part of movies, but it's not everything.
Hi, sorry.
question? I have a question here. This gentleman's had his hand up for a long time with the red bullet.
What do you think will be the future of live recorded music in movies as opposed to music coming out of sample libraries, computers, and all that?
Right. Well, it's live music. I mean, recording with orchestra is just part of what movies are. It's inherent. It's in the DNA of making films. And there's many other ways to make music with computers. And I think that's vibrant and it is a good thread for music. But the idea of using orchestral music, you know, it's just a sound that it's just great for storytelling. It has a lot of texture. There's a lot of understanding of it, I think, in our DNA as listeners and how we perceive certain ideas in music. And I think that will always be there. There'll always be this beauty in the live performance in translating ideas from the composer to the listener.
Hi, sorry, I have a question up here. Hello?
Okay.
Sorry. Hi. I just have a very quick question. I'm curious about the... Sorry, I'm just here on the balcony. I just have a very quick question. I'm curious about the collaboration you made with the Cosmopolis soundtrack with the group Metric. Was it your idea to collaborate with them, and how did that collaboration process work?
I met them before that film. We had worked on another film before that, and I thought that they would be good I thought for Cosmopolis they would be good collaborators, and I just enjoyed working with Emily. And you know, we're still actually still doing some things together. So I think that was just a good collaboration between two writers, and that's how that developed.
We have time for just one more, I'm afraid, so I'm going to just wave my hand around like this.
Sorry.
Someone over there.
Sorry.
Anyone? Okay, someone over there. Yeah, someone had their hand up. Okay. Just one. I'm sorry, only one.
I've been holding this mic for quite a while.
Okay.
Sorry. Mr. Shaw, it's very fascinating to hear you speak about your process when you write for film. I'm curious to hear about how you work with the director, as they probably don't read off a whole score. You'd have to have a way of presenting the music before it actually gets set on the film. Is that correct?
Well, I think that it depends on each film is quite different, I think. I know with David Cronenberg, over the course of our career, we've made 15 films, and it was before, you know, mock-ups or anything like that. So it wasn't, I didn't think I did any mock-ups until maybe into the years 2000. Everything was done just on a piano or not. I mean, I think all the David Fincher films, Seven, The Game, and Panic Room, right, were all done, I think, right to orchestra. I may have heard a little bit of music before that. So it's just good to have a lot of trust with the director, how much you can do without the use of demos. And then there can be a good relationship with the director as well. If you you can translate your ideas into good demos. I know with Peter Jackson we did use that process for Lord of the Rings, and it was very detailed storytelling. So I think it really depends a lot on the relationship, the composer to the director. There's no, you know, precise way to do that. I think you can develop your own relationship with each director as to how you want to work and how you want to express the ideas in the film.
Well, Howard, you know, for almost 2 years we've dreamed of having you here, and the fact that you made the effort to come has just been wonderful, and you've articulated an art, which is a very difficult thing to do. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm very, very welcome. Very glad to be here. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone, for listening.